Good morning and welcome to the Breath of the Void release event. I am R.A.O. Laster and I am promoting a book for Aditya Deshmukh, the Breath of the Void series, as I mentioned earlier. It's going to be a short story. It's going to be a short story collection. All the books are by Mr. Deshmukh, and I was going to give you a short reading of the description as well as a reading of the full story, The Red Tree, included in the collection. But for the stories themselves, we've got A Plain Nameless Buzz. A man in search of his coworker on a strange planet haunted by an even stranger being who has no physical attributes other than a maddening buzz. A Dance of Flames. An unyielding queen of fire defending her kingdom. The Red Tree, which I'll be reading later, is about two teenagers exploring the abandoned woods that house a primordial power. Daughter of the Sky is about a conflicted alien at the center of a mission to murder mankind. Well, that got dark quickly, Deshmukh. Breath of the Silver Lake. A young boy confronting a sinister lake deity. All Hallows Eve. Kids venturing into a witch's door on Halloween and getting something they didn't ask for. Well, these last two, Deshmukh, they leave a whole lot to wonder about. I want to read these last. I want to get more into reading these last two. I had to skim over everything to find something I could read, given the time. But what was it? It was Breath of the Silver Lake and All Hallows Eve. That is just too ambiguous to not be interested in. Then we've got the Dragon Pearl. A slayer hell-bent on protecting his family against all odds. A reaper's love. A love-stricken man falling for a supernatural entity who knows no love. I read that one in full to see if it was going to be part of my collection, if it was going to be the one I was going to read. And without getting into any spoilers, that one is pretty great, and it seems that Mr. Deshmukh follows a theme with some of his stories that I've seen. The ones that I read, I saw kind of a recurring theme, and the last one in the series is Seamouth, one or the other. A forgotten god rising up from the oceans to erase governments and spread its dark reign on our world once more. And that's the collection with a brief description. That's from what I saw in the descriptions and what I was able to glance over. This is going to be an amazing collection that I seriously recommend for everybody. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into reading The Red Tree. Julia's eyes swept across the tall, massive trees like daggers of darkness shooting up toward the sunlit sky. She glanced back at the bridge they had just crossed. The narrow, shaky structure was at the mercy of the moaning winds coming from the mountains. Julie jumped on the solid ground and sighed with relief. She wrapped her hands around herself, shivering. The air was warm, but something in the woods made her blood run cold. "We should go home." "Are you kidding me?" barked John. His forehead glistened with sweat. His chest grew and shrunk as he breathed hard. "We're almost there." "Look at you. You're exhausted. Besides," Julia's voice trailed off as the woods conjured in her mind a terrible image of a tree-like monster breathing fire and devouring children. "I'm fine. What's up with that face?" "Father warned me to stay away from these woods." Julie stepped toward the bridge. She dreaded to cross it once more, but there was no other way to escape the woods and what lurked inside. Yes, she'd gladly do it to reach the safety of home. John grabbed her hand. "You're coming with me. You promised." "But what if the tales are true?" "How can you believe those stories? Is there any way a fire-breathing tree can physically exist?" "I don't know. The folklore cannot be completely false. The stories come from actual incidents, and they do carry some measure of truth. I agree such a tree cannot exist, but what about Amelia and Jordan? This is where they were last seen. You know Amelia and Jordan had history, and their parents didn't want them together. Don't worry about them. I don't think they went missing. They simply ran away. Happily ever after. Isn't that nice?" John said, rubbing his chin. "A happily ever after." "And what about you? The voices. You started hearing them ever since you saw the red tree for the first time, right?" "I don't hear any voices," John snapped. The anger and frustration gleaming on his face, disfigured by such rage and helplessness, frightened Julia so much that she stepped backwards onto the fragile bridge. She felt safety in the same shaking motion that had frightened her before, for the monster before her was unlike anything she had seen. John took a minute to calm down. He reached for her trembling shoulder. "I'm sorry, I just don't like talking about it." He took her hand. "Come," he said in a broken voice. Despite her better judgment, Julia followed him. With every step, the forest grew wilder, and Julia's heart sank further. Regret began settling in when the trees, magnificent, tall, and overwhelming, started taking the shapes of creatures from her nightmares. No, it's just a trick of the shadows. But the distant shapes persisted, and she found herself staring at John to avoid seeing anything strange. Soon the gigantic canopy blocked the sun, and Julia didn't have to be wary about the distant shapes anymore, for something more terrible had arrived to welcome her. Darkness now knocked at the door of her soul, making her heart jump. Julia closed her eyes and sought comfort in the blindness. But how could she block the silence, the terrible absence of sound that was driving her crazy? "Why is this place so silent?" "These trees are ancient things. They don't feed on the nutrients dissolved in soil. No, they don't want soil. They want souls. Animals, insects, anything that moves." "Stop, you're scaring me." "They consume the flesh and blood and bones, and if there's anything they leave behind, it's this haunting silence." John looked sad, as if the silence really did haunt him. "If you don't stop now, forget the promise. I'm leaving." "All right, sorry." John abruptly paused in front of Julia, causing her to run into him. "We're here." "The red tree?" Julia said, hands on chest, feeling the crazy pounding of her heart. "It's so dark here, I cannot see anything." She pulled out a flashlight from her backpack. "Where is it?" John, with an odd glint in his eye, walked to a tall withered tree. He touched its red bark. "Here," he whispered, and half of the word never making it out of his shuddering throat. As though afraid the tree would grow a serpentine arm that would curl around his neck, John hurriedly stepped back. Julia approached the dying tree in total disbelief. "Are you fucking kidding me?" The disappointing sight freed her mind from the brutal clutches of fear. Another feeling conquered her brain. She felt cheated. "Where are the 10,000 branches, each one of them 100 meters long? Where's the bark that can withstand the force of 100 elephants? Where's the red dagger of darkness said to bleed the heavens?" She went to John, her face screwed up. "I walked all this way to see this rotting thing." She let all of her anger out on the tree. After a flurry of kicks, the tree still stood, and Julia hated it even more. "Anyway, let's just go. God, I'm never going to put so much faith in folklore." She took John's hand and began walking toward the exit, a gap between two gigantic trees from where they had come. When he remained fixed in his position, as if rooted in the ground, Julia brought the flashlight toward his face. "What's wrong?" she demanded, suddenly scared. She had never seen tears streaming down John's cheeks. A rustling sound came from the gap. When she looked over her shoulder, the gap had gone. In its place rose another tree, which Julia knew wasn't there. Is this just my exhausted brain, or are the trees moving? She scanned the region once more, her eyes widening. What's happening, John? The ground rumbled. The flashlight flickered and died. Everything turned black. Red streaks appeared from under the forest floor and started crawling on the trees, along the surface and below, as though the forest was an organism and these streaks its veins. I'm sorry, John whispered and ran away. The trees momentarily gave way for his escape, but when Julia followed him, screaming his name, a crack slithered across the ground and threw her away from the closing exit. Before long, another tree had filled the gap. The red tree shook as lumps of earth beneath it began to rising. Soil flowed down its round edges, revealing a humongous red womb. A dozen red veins slithering around it connected it to the surrounding trees from where unearthly voices came. It sounded like tortured souls. Inside the womb's thick, glowing membrane was a humanoid figure of flesh and roots and stars. No! Julia screamed. Crawling backward, digging her fingers into the soil, a vein emerged from the womb and reached for her. It penetrated her stomach, snatched her from the ground, and swung her toward the womb of the universe where the primordial being waited for her. Dude, I'm not going in there. Zack glanced at the woods and swallowed. Let the authorities handle this. Don't you want to find your cousin, Zack? Of course I do, but the stories... Don't worry. If anything happens, I've got your back. Now hurry up. We're losing time. Julia needs us. John pushed his friend toward the woods, hiding his tears. I'm so sorry. But the voices, yes. They'll stop and I'll have my happily ever after. If I do this, they'll stop. They will, right? Right? That when I read it just to see if it was what I was going to do for the reading, I didn't feel it near as much as being able to actually read through it with you guys. Mr. Deshmukh has an amazing way with words, and I recommend everybody share it, get this book out there. We need people reading this. It is art. Well, you guys, I think that's all the time I have. I'm actually cutting into somebody else's time. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that. You have a wonderful day, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this.